A new export law, recently enacted by Canada, has brought U.S. agricultural exports to a near standstill. Stricter safety standards, tougher traceability rules, and new licensing requirements are shutting out millions of tons of American farm goods. On paper, it's about protecting Canadian consumers. But in reality, trade experts say it's a calculated retaliation.
The vibe is still off between Canada and America when it comes to trade negotiations, Donna, with U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra saying a considerable amount of work needs to be done to try and reach a deal, and that the biggest U.S. complaint is the fact Canada retaliated at all.
And the shockwaves are hitting hardest in the rural states that once formed Donald Trump's political base. Is this just a trade dispute, or the moment when Washington's political games finally push rural America into a full-blown collapse? And more pointedly, how many of these farmers voted for the man whose trade bluster set this all in motion, Donald Trump, and will now pay for it with their livelihoods? Before we begin, please note this video is intended for social commentary and analysis based on publicly available information and a range of academic perspectives. We do not offer conclusions, nor do we support or oppose any organization, policy, or individual. Our goal is to spark reflection and allow each viewer to form their own point of view. For decades, Canada has been one of America's most stable agricultural trade partners, a reliable buyer of corn, soybeans, dairy, beef, and processed grains. But that stability began to fracture during the Trump administration.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. President Trump again imposed unjustified tariffs on our nation.
In 2018, Trump's trade war with China triggered retaliatory tariffs that left U.S. farmers sitting on mountains of unsold crops. At the same time, the White House alienated key allies, including Canada, by tearing into NAFTA negotiations, imposing steel and aluminum tariffs, and treating longtime partners as economic adversaries. While those policies were billed as America First,
America First, America.
The reality was rural America paid the price. Canadian agricultural buyers began looking elsewhere, diversifying imports from Europe, South America, and Asia. Trust eroded. Now, Ottawa's new export law, with its strict food safety checks, traceability demands, and new licensing rules, lands like a precision strike. It targets the very sectors and states most dependent on cross-border sales, and it does so at a moment when U.S. agriculture is still recovering from the whiplash of Trump-era trade instability.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary. Tariff.
Iowa. Known as the nation's corn and soybean belt, Iowa has seen exports to Canada plunge over 40% in a single month. Truckloads of crops are being turned back at the border, prices have dropped up to 25%, and farms are cutting planting plans. This echoes 2018's trade war pain. Only now, farmers say, the safety net is thinner. Nebraska. With beef and dairy rejected over documentation issues, local prices have collapsed. Slaughterhouses have reduced shifts and cattle operations are liquidating herds. Many remember being told in 2019 that short-term pain from Trump's trade battles would lead to long-term gain. That gain never came. Wisconsin. America's dairy capital is losing contracts to Canadian buyers. Cheese exports are down 50% for some producers, and hundreds of small farms face closure.
American cheese with retaliatory tariffs of up to 25%, and already the big manufacturers report declining sales.
Wisconsin dairy farmers, many of whom supported Trump, now feel abandoned, caught between foreign trade walls and domestic indifference. Minnesota and North Dakota. Grain shipments are stalled, storage costs are climbing, and prices are falling. Farmers here recall Trump's promises that trade negotiations would open more markets. Instead, many are watching markets shrink.
Frustrations over the Trump administration's use of tariffs.
Tariffs are having a real impact right here in the Treasure State, with farmers and ranchers feeling it firsthand.
South Dakota and Illinois. Beef, corn, and soy exports have slowed to a trickle. Processing plants are cutting shifts. Rural economies built on agriculture are contracting. A slow-motion recession spreading from farms to Main Street. Globally, the U.S. is losing ground. While American farmers face border delays, Canadian buyers are increasing imports from Brazil, Argentina, and the European Union. Meanwhile, Canada is tightening its own production systems and insulating domestic producers. In trade circles, there's little doubt. Years of unpredictability in U.S. policy under Trump weakened America's leverage, allies learned to live without U.S. exports, and rivals filled the gap. Ottawa's new law is not just about food safety, it's a signal that Canada is prepared to defend its market even if it means sidelining American suppliers. This crisis is more than a dispute over paperwork. It's the visible cost of a foreign policy that turned friends into bargaining chips and left America's rural heartland exposed. The same states that were promised prosperity through tough negotiations are now enduring economic body blows with no clear end in sight. So the question is, will Washington learn from these mistakes and rebuild trust with its allies? Or will the farmers who were told they'd be first in line keep finding themselves last in line when it matters most? What's your take on Canada's move and America's response? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the real stories behind the headlines, subscribe to The Global Lens.